just make, there we go, and we are recording. So if anyone objects, thank you for joining us. But just so we are transparent about that. So today's webinar, Talent Mobility for Business Growth, Aligning Practices to Drive Organizational Impact. It's an opportunity for us to review Sirva's 2018 Annual Mobility Report. This is our second annual report, focusing on a very similar topic. Today's webinar, we hope to provide you with some insights and potentially some action items that you can take back to your organizations to help better understand how your mobility function and your mobility program can better support the needs of your organization. My name is Karen Kramer, and I'm joined today by my colleague, Kathy Burrows. We are both members of Sirva's Global Consulting Practice. We work with clients and prospects to either design or redesign their mobility programs, from process to policy to service delivery model. We look at vendors, technology, really everything soup to nuts, to make sure that the mobility program that the organizations that we work for or work with really have a best-in-class program that is designed specifically for their organization that meets the needs of both the business and the relocating employee. We also have an opportunity to work on lots of special projects related to the mobility space. So very exciting for us. We say that we never have a boring day in our jobs. There's always something new and interesting coming across our plates. So it's a great function to work with in mobility, and I'm sure that we've worked with or at least spoken to some of you on the line. So again, appreciate everyone joining us today for our webinar. Today's objectives for our session, sorry, I'm getting a little trigger happy with the slides here. First, we want you to get a better understanding of how the priorities of your organization really can impact the way in which the mobility function operates. So really understanding what the organization as a whole is looking to achieve and how mobility can really drive success in some of those different areas. We'll also show you some information that we've gathered from our research that really will identify opportunities for the mobility function to either brand itself or rebrand itself as a key business partner. We're all aware that mobility provides operational and administrative support to the organization when it comes to moving individuals from one location to another. But really, we see a significant opportunity for mobility to really play more a role in terms of business partnering within the organization to provide more advisory or consultative services to the business to make better, more rational decisions around who to deploy, where to deploy those individuals, and the types of support that should be provided. We'll also go ahead and define some ways in which the mobility service delivery model can provide support to the organization and business to achieve some of those strategic objectives. Many organizations focus on policy and policy redesign as a way to improve their mobility program. And Sirva's perspective and point of view is that, yes, that's a key component that needs to happen when you're looking to engage and implement any mobility transformation, but you also need to look at the way in which services are delivered, whether it's the alignment of the mobility team from a geographical or a business line perspective, the scope of services that mobility provides, the way that the mobility team engages with internal partners and external partners to deliver service, as well as any technology that's included to really support the process and help to manage the experience from both the customer internal stakeholder perspective as well as from the employee's perspective. What we're going to do today, we conducted a survey, an annual survey, and for those of you that were able to participate, we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Our survey and kind of the insights and observations that we're able to gather from that survey really is driven by the participants and your willingness and openness to provide information about your program. So we thank you for participating. In the event that you are not able to participate for one reason or another in this year's survey, don't worry, we will be doing it again next year. So we really encourage you to look out for that link, that information, to take some time to complete the survey, and to then, receive some insights and observations in the report that is driven and really based on those survey results. So for our 2018 survey, which, by the way, will be released in next week, so keep an eye out for it. We hope you find it as kind of insightful as we intend it to be. We had 245 respondents, which represented 235 unique organizations. As I mentioned earlier, this was our second year doing this survey and producing ultimately our report of findings. So we had a big jump in participation for 2018 from 2017, so we were very thrilled and excited with that. We hope to see even more of you participate in next year's survey. So again, thank you to those who contributed this year. Similar to last year, the 2017 report, the survey results, really indicate some areas of misalignment that may have a negative impact on the ability of mobility to be effective in terms of helping the organization to meet any growth and talent priorities that really are prevalent and a key objective of the organization. Our report strives to be a little bit different from some of the other reports that you may see in the market. We did some work and we have some information on policies, in particular the way in which policy support or package support is delivered to the employee. But we really tried to focus on the role of mobility within the organization and ways in which mobility can really bridge that gap to move from being a purely operational function, kind of a back office function, to being more perceived and viewed more as a strategic business partner that the business and the organization engages early and frequently as they're looking to deploy talent. Some of the key focus areas of our report included mobility program demographics and the ways in which those are changing, and some of the challenges and opportunities that are presented as mobility, kind of the profile of mobility populations change. We looked at the customer and employee experience and ways in which the mobility function can structure itself from a policy and service delivery model perspective to really have an impact on that experience. We looked at the role of mobility partnerships in terms of, again, helping to bridge the gap between mobility being operational and being able to be a strategic business partner. We looked, as I mentioned, at policy and the way in which policy or package support is delivered to the individual. And then we looked at organizational change, specifically mergers and acquisitions, as a real opportunity for mobility to demonstrate the value add that team and that function brings to the table, specific to organizational change in terms of creating awareness about some potential challenges that may exist when you're bringing on board new employees, potentially from different locations, or looking to harmonize or transform the mobility program that the new organization now operates under. As I think it goes without saying for most of us on the phone, and we recognize that mobility is significant. We're seeing more mobility today than ever before. It may look and feel a little bit different than it has historically. We're seeing some changes in terms of the types of moves that are happening. Long-term international moves are still happening, but we are definitely seeing an uptick in the usage of both short-term moves as well as frequent business traveler arrangements. So you'll see some of the stats here anticipating a 41% of international short-term moves in 1 year, and then a 56% increase in short-term moves in a 3-year period. And for extended business travelers, stats show, a 44% increase in extended business traveler arrangement usage over the next 1 to 3 years, 44% for both of those different time periods. One note on the business travelers, while we absolutely agree that that is definitely jumping, or that type of move or employee profile is definitely jumping in terms of volume, some of that jump may just be due in part to increased awareness around this group of travelers. Again, historically, they have not been part of a formal mobility program. They've typically been managed outside of the mobility program, but as compliance requirements become increasingly complex, and as more geographies start recognizing these travelers as a source of revenue, and they start kind of beefing up their compliance standards and their tracking of compliance as individuals enter and leave their particular jurisdictions, there's more awareness and focus on these extended business travelers as a source of revenue. So that just increased awareness may be contributing to some of what we're looking at in terms of anticipated increase in terms of that population. It's more an increased awareness, not necessarily a 44% jump in actual volumes, but definitely increases for both short terms and extended business travelers. One area of interest, we thought we'd highlight some of the top 5 host destinations that were identified as part of our research: Western Europe, China, Eastern Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. So obviously movement into locations that, are not necessarily new host locations by any means, but may not have made it into a top 5 list historically. Interesting to point out that, the U.S. is not in there as a top 5 destination. I'm sure there's a variety of reasons that play into that, not least of which is some of the kind of immigration uncertainty that exists in the U.S., but definitely interesting that we're seeing movement in some of these other key locations. And that in and of itself may present some challenges for mobility teams in terms of managing the different compliance and other requirements for moving people into those particular locations. So it's important that mobility teams, as well as the vendors that are engaged as part of the mobility process, are really up to speed on what those requirements are, so that they can minimize any exposure to risk and other such concerns. The next slide, so on the left-hand side, we asked a question about company culture. So really the kind of what an organization is looking to foster in terms of the culture within their organization. Overwhelmingly at 41%, companies are in a kind of a growth-focused culture. 35% people-focused, so really saying we want people to feel valued. We want that culture to permeate throughout our organization globally. Efficiency came in at 16%, and then our catch-all other was at 8%. Very interesting when you flip over to the right side of the slide and we look at organizational priorities. So similar question, but we asked from an organizational perspective, what are some of the key focus areas there? Some alignment with culture in terms of growth. So 53% responded that organizational growth was a top priority of the organization, followed by cost management, talent development, compliance, other, and then employee loyalty at 4%. A little bit of a disconnect if you look at the company culture priorities and then the organizational priorities. You know, looking at a 35% or cultural priority or company culture priority for people focused, but yet when you look at the organizational priorities on the flip side, talent development and employee loyalty ranked relatively low in terms of organizational priorities. So a real kind of contradiction there. You would think that if you're looking to develop a culture that's very people-focused, talent development and employee loyalty should rank higher in terms of organizational priorities than they do based on our survey results. So a contradiction there, and somewhat interesting to kind of notice that misalignment. You know, we've talked a lot at Sirva and just within our industry as a whole around mobility, the mobility link to talent management. And, you know, in this context, when we talk about talent management, it's not just looking at, you know, senior level folks and ways in which they can get opportunities to grow and develop from a professional standpoint. You know, we're looking at the talent management also includes scenarios where, you know, you're developing or you have an intern program and you're looking to pull intern resources for, you know, a summer or whatever it may be from universities nationwide or globally, and you're bringing them to your headquarters location so that they can experience the culture of your organization and, you know, kind of how your organization operates as a way to recruit and gather or gain interest from that potential talent pool as, you know, workforce when they are eligible out of college or university. That's mobility. That's talent mobility. You know, you're looking at moving resources or individuals or talent to a particular location so that they can get some experience. You know, so talent management and kind of this link to mobility is not reserved just for high levels of, you know, employees. It really happens at all levels within the organization. Talent management, and I apologize, I flipped that screen. Talent management is also, you know, you are looking to expand operations in a particular location, and you need a very specific, defined skill set in the location, and there's not a local resource that fits that profile. You need to import talent. That's mobility linking to talent management. You know, this really speaks to ways in which mobility is used to meet any talent or resource needs from a recruiting perspective, from a, you know, personal development perspective, from a performance management perspective, you know, and then going as far as, you know, career and succession planning. When we looked at the top 3 organizational priorities, the top 3 were organizational growth, cost management, and then talent development. So again, just, you know, one series of data points that really points to the significance of mobility within an organization. In order for an organization to grow and in order for an organization to develop their talent, components of that are offering opportunities for individuals, employees to have work experiences outside of their home location, whether that's on a domestic basis or on a global or an international basis. The second key data point that really supports the argument regarding the significance of mobility was a question around deploying talent. So 80% of organizations rated deploying talent as extremely important or very important to the overall success of the organization. Said differently, unless an organization is able to move talent, again, domestically or globally, the success of the organization will be in jeopardy, right? They're not going to be able to achieve what they need to from an organizational perspective unless they have the ability to move talent, okay? So, point number 2. For anyone that's looking to make a business case on how significant mobility is and the critical role that mobility plays within an organization. We asked a third question specific to career and work experience. 49% of companies rated career and work experience outside of an employee's home location as a key requirement for career advancement. So when you look at organizations' kind of talent priorities, it's the ability to attract talent, to retain talent, and to develop talent to allow for individuals to progress through their career, hopefully with that organization. Any investments that are made in developing talent and recruiting talent are significant for an organization, and companies really want to get the most out of that investment. Being able to provide opportunities for individuals to advance is a real key way to retain that talent and to continue to challenge your resources and provide them with opportunities so that they, from a professional and personal standpoint, feel valued and feel successful. And, companies are saying in order to move through your career, progress through your career with the organization, you need to have work experience outside of your home location. So, enter mobility. Mobility is the way that they get that different experience. So, again, 3 kind of data points that really point to the significance of mobility and the importance of understanding what the organizational priorities are when it comes to talent, when it comes to their global workforce, and the role that mobility plays in, promoting a successful workforce and a loyal workforce within the organization. We talk a little bit, I think some people, again, think that this whole talent to mobility link is reserved for, very large organizations that move significant numbers of people on a regular basis. In some cases, that's true. I think when we talk about very mature programs, they are programs that have been around for a while. They're programs that do move significant volumes. But as I just kind of described in some of those examples, mobility and talent, that link exists at organizations of all different sizes and of all different mobility populations, whether you're moving 10 people a year or 10,000 people a year. It's important to understand what's driving those moves. And again, really understand how those moves are driving or supporting what the organization is looking to achieve. So we like to look at programs kind of on this spectrum. It's a bit simplified, but I think it's a great way for organizations to kind of take a pulse of where their mobility program falls along this maturity spectrum. So far left side, really those are programs that are maybe just starting out, relatively small. Top priority is just making sure that everything is in place from a compliance perspective, minimizing any compliance risks associated with immigration, tax, payroll, reporting, withholding, data security, things of that nature. No one wants the organization's name or the name of an individual to appear negatively for failure to comply with certain requirements. So it's imperative that as organizations are moving people, again, domestically or internationally, that they have a good handle on understanding what the requirements are and what the employee needs prior to entering a particular location and working in a particular location. The next two categories are really where we see the bulk of the organizations that we work with sitting. The one side is the service delivery model, the other side is policy. So service delivery model, you have defined processes in place. Yes, there may be opportunities for those processes to be more efficient, absolutely, but you do have processes in place. You have a defined scope of services. You may be leveraging some sort of technology to help manage your program. It may be very basic, maybe a little further along, but there's some sort of technology in place to help support the program. There's, performance management metrics for internal teams and vendors. You have SLAs and KPIs, with your vendors to make sure that they're adhering to service level agreements and delivering the quality of service that you expect for your employees. From a policy perspective, you have defined policies or at least guidelines in place that give insight and serve as a resource when you're developing packages for individuals that are being deployed. You hopefully are tracking those policy exceptions and on a regular basis revisiting your policies or your guidelines to understand areas where you may need to adjust because the current policies or packages are not necessarily meeting the needs of the business or the relocating employee, and hopefully some level of cost reporting for your program, just understanding what the total spend is as it relates to your domestic, global, or a combination of the two program, and you're able to share that reporting as needed with key stakeholders within the organization or the different business lines that are really that are using mobility so that they have transparency to those costs. As I said, a lot of organizations kind of fit on that middle plateau or that middle line there. And, often they will say, I think it's about time for us to make some changes to our policy. We're hearing some noise in a particular location, or we're hearing some noise about a particular benefit that we're providing, or there are some operational challenges that need to be addressed. So you'll make kind of incremental changes to processes and working with vendors and things like that. All of that is great, but, where we see significant transformation in programs and kind of getting to that next step up where the mobility program really is very integrated with the talent and mobility strategies are very integrated. That's really where, significant transformation of the mobility program comes into play. Recognizing that, the talent function may, be where the mobility function reports into within an organization. They may be two very distinct and separate functions within an organization or kind of other variations of that relationship. What the message is here and kind of the ultimate goal is really not to necessarily align the different activities that are performed by the function, but really to understand what the different strategies are. So, for example, from a recruiting standpoint, what are some of the challenges that the talent function has when it comes to recruiting talent, and how can mobility help to solve or alleviate some of those challenges? Whether it's building a program specific for interns or building, a mobility program or policy specific to pulling talent out of a particular location. It's making sure that what's in place for the mobility program is really supporting the needs of what is required from the organization, from their talent, from their global workforce. Okay. So moving on, we asked as part of our survey some questions just around kind of the perception of service delivery model and policies for mobility and how those really align within the organization. So from a service delivery perspective, 64% of the organizations that we surveyed rated their mobility delivery model as somewhat or completely aligned to support organizational strategy and objectives. So in other words, they're saying, yeah, the way in which our mobility function is structured, they really are able to support what we're looking to do from an organizational perspective. You know, whether that's having resources aligned with different business units or different geographies, or, you know, the processes that they have in place are really, you know, supporting what we're looking to do from an organizational perspective, you know, and things are moving along. Yeah, there's probably some hiccups here and there, but for the most part, it's, you know, the program is running well and serving the needs of the organization and the business. Mobility policies were rated just slightly below, so 63% of organizations rated mobility policies as somewhat or completely aligned. So again, said another way, you know, when we're looking to deploy a particular resource to a particular location, the mobility policies that we have available to us are in line with the support that we expect and need and want to provide to that employee. So looking pretty positive on that left-hand side of the screen. We then asked the question a bit of a different way, and we asked survey participants to describe their global mobility programs. 68% of them described their programs as either traditional or stuck in the dark ages, which is very kind of interesting and a bit of a contradiction again here. You know, mobility is a critical lever, as we've talked about, that enables organizational growth and, you know, talent development opportunities for their employees. The classification of a mobility program as traditional or stuck in the dark ages really contradicts the claims that there is alignment between mobility programs and processes with organizational objectives and priorities. You know, I don't think that anyone would look at, you know, a description of stuck in the dark ages as something positive. It means that it's very traditional, not necessarily keeping up with the ever-changing needs of the organization. So definitely some misalignment in terms of the perception and kind of the reality of what we're seeing when it comes to mobility programs. We also asked about just the role of mobility and how that's changed. So 57% of organizations indicated that the role of the function, the global mobility function, had changed in the past 1 to 2 years. The top motivators for those change were the fact that strategic business objectives required talent deployment. So again, kind of recognizing that there were strategic business needs that required a particular individual or a particular candidate to relocate to a particular location for, you know, the benefit of the organization. An example of that, you know, you're looking to do some succession planning for the next CEO of your organization, and the individual or individuals that are tapped for that role need to get experience in other locations in order to qualify to fill that role down the road. So again, enter mobility as a way to provide some of those development opportunities. A focus on compliance and risk awareness. Not surprising, just given the compliance environment today. So, you know, this stat is really saying we know that mobility is well positioned to provide information and to educate the organization and the business on what some of those compliance requirements are, to create some risk awareness where we as an organization need to make sure that we're taking certain actions in order to minimize or eliminate that risk altogether. And then a focus on employee and customer customer experience. So really engaging mobility to better understand how the internal stakeholder or customer experience can be improved as it relates to deploying talent, as well as obviously the experience of the relocating employee. So again, all really positive, right, that the role is changing. Mobility, it seems, is being pulled in the ways in which we want mobility to be pulled into some of those conversations. But when we look at a bit of a different stat, we saw that 61% of organizations assign an internal resource as the assignee or relocating employee's primary point of contact. And when asked about the top 3 challenges for the mobility organization, they were cost management, process efficiency, and speed to deploy. Process efficiency and speed to deploy are very operational challenges. Right, so there were breakdowns in the process or slowdowns in the process that added additional time that it took to get from, the candidate selection stage through the point where the employee was actually deployed to the new location. And then obviously cost management, that speaks a little bit to, potentially there are business lines or individuals that are not necessarily using defined policies or programs. They're kind of going rogue and providing their own benefits or support as they see fit to the employee. Or there were challenges in terms of managing spend in particular locations. So when you look at all of those challenges and you look at the number of organizations that put their internal resource as the primary point of contact for the individual, it really limits the ability or the capacity of that internal resource to move away from some of the more operational components of managing that relocation to allow them to focus more on that more strategic or consultative business partnering. If the internal resource is, constantly having to put out fires or answer questions around, why a particular payroll component was processed incorrectly, or, provide status updates on, where they were in terms of the visa process, that's taking away, again, depleting capacity for that internal resource to really provide more consultative strategic support to the business. We saw that that some of the change in terms of the role of the mobility resource was to focus on employee and customer experience. But again, when you look at kind of the end-to-end experience, part of that includes getting the process right, and eliminating noise from that process. And when we look at the fact that there are still significant challenges when it comes to process efficiency, that impacts both the internal customer as well as the employee. When you look at speed to deploy, definitely an impact to the employee, but also to the customer. If they have a, pressing need to get feet on the ground in a particular location, and there are challenges in terms of just being able to get that individual over there on a timely basis, that potentially has a negative impact on the experience of that customer as it relates to mobility. One way to kind of minimize or maybe reduce some of those challenges and to provide capacity for internal resources to focus on, business partnering more so than the operational components of the relocation are really to leverage either internal or external partnerships, that provide access to vendor expertise. There's opportunities for resource scalability as volumes fluctuate. There's, some benefits around just operational efficiencies, as well as, again, just generating capacity for internal resources to be more focused on strategic business partnering.
Thanks, Karen. We also wanted to get some insight into why organizations were moving their talent. And through our survey, we found that, by no surprise, that the largest majority of moves were really driven by the fact that there was a specific resource gap that needed to be filled. So 57% of moves were initiated basically to fill a resource gap. Then 28% of the moves were then leadership or talent development programs, where we're sending someone out on assignment or transferring them as part of their growth within the organization or as part of a leadership initiative within the organization. One surprise that we did see is that 16% of initiations were self-selected. The employee volunteered or raised their hand that they wanted to go on assignment or they wanted to permanently transfer. And then we had 12% of moves were really focused on providing the employee an opportunity to get a new experience or to take the company culture and take it to a different location and help the organization spread their company culture to another facility. So as you look at your 2018 move volume, really take the opportunity to see how your population matches up against the survey results. Take the opportunity to try and gain some insight into your program, looking for trends, and then looking for efficiencies that could be used to make 2019 a better year for your program. You know, what insight can you give back to the business to help them better manage their moves for 2019? So when you look at the moves that were designed specifically to facilitate a resource gap, you know, what locations were these in? You know, do we see a trend where there are challenges in finding local talent in those markets? And do we see this as a trend that's going to continue? Because that will be something that you'll want to take into consideration with your program as far as volume, costs, and then potentially looking with the business to find alternatives to make sure that this is the right thing to do with the people that you're moving from a talent perspective. Because if there were local resources, you know, did we really look at every opportunity to find that local resource, or did the business just have a particular person in mind and didn't exhaust the activities to find a local resource? And then if local resources are hard to find, what measures can we take to help contain costs, and how can we make sure that we use the right type of assignments, whether it be a short-term assignment or business traveler in the interim, rather than taking someone on a long-term assignment or moving someone permanently while you look for that local talent. With the self-select, it's good to take a look, if you do have a large population, to look at your trends. What locations are employees asking to go to? What are the levels of the employee within the organization? Are there specific business lines that tend to gravitate towards this more than others? And just ensure that when you're offering this option that there's a good balance between the benefit that the organization gets from it by offering this kind of flexibility and what the employee gets out of it. So for self-directed moves, you want to make sure that the business isn't necessarily covering a lot of the costs, that it is the employee that's requested the move, and so a majority of the expenses should fall on that particular individual. With cultural awareness and experience moves, take a look at which organizations or businesses use this type of driver and get a better insight into what the business purpose was as far as spreading the culture, gaining the knowledge. And ask the business, you know, was their goal achieved through what they did? And with the length of time that the employee sent over, did it achieve what they were looking to do? And are there efficiencies that could be picked up? So, for example, did someone go on a long-term assignment that could have used a short-term assignment? Or could the same objectives have been done with a business traveler or commuter program? And it's good to get that information from the business of what worked really well so that you can help guide other businesses as they may have the same need so that they can gain the best practice from what other business organizations within your group have done. And so some drivers are very black and white and some are gray. So it's really based on facts and circumstances, but it is important to make sure that you have a process in place that the business can easily identify what program and what benefits to provide when they do have a particular move. So with that, we also wanted to take a look at program package design. And we took a look at where there are tiered policies available. How is the application of the benefits applied within the tiers? And we found that 57% of the programs are using the employee level as the trigger for determining what level of benefits an employee gets. And this is really popular specifically for like domestic U.S. programs. It can work also for cross-border moves, but as more organizations take a look at why they're moving people, and with the growing influx of self-directed moves, really drivers are starting to take over as the way to take a look at how benefits are tiered within an organization. So we're seeing more formal programs and decision tree resources set up to help the business choose the right program from the menu of relocation or mobility programs within an organization. What was really interesting to see here was 27% of programs have the business leader or the HR person design the package. And this doesn't mean that whoever you know, you get a better package and they're just creating packages off the top of their head. There really is a structure that's set in place. And this is where your core flex programs or your segmented programs really come into play, where there is a structured program in place that the business uses that has some flexibility for them to design custom programs based upon a budget or based upon the need of what the employee needs from a family perspective or from a location perspective to customize. One thing that was surprising is from a flexibility standpoint, only 5% of programs offer the employee the ability to customize their package with preferences. But the key is, regardless of which lane you pick as far as how you tier your program and what drives it, is to make sure that controls are in place to ensure that the user has a defined selection process so it's easy for them to take a look at their person that they want to move and understand how to use mobility to get them to the new location. So with that, we wanted to take a look at some of the components that make up a program. And we did ask some questions around how companies use lump sum as part of their mobility programs. And some people think of lump sum as a program itself, but it's really a vehicle to distribute benefits within a program. And so 64% of organizations used a lump sum component in one or more of their policies, and this was for domestic and global moves. And 37% of organizations offered a lump sum only program where the employee just gets that one-time cash payment and is left on their own to kind of coordinate and pay for their relocation. And then 29% of organizations calculated the value of that lump sum based on a predefined set of policy provisions. And so in many cases, business organizations were looking at like house hunting trips, travel to the new location, temporary housing, household goods shipments. And so when you think of the first two, like house hunting and travel to the new location, those are typically expenses that are reimbursable items. So it really kind of makes sense to add some efficiency to the employee to provide them the cash, and they can coordinate those activities and pay for them directly without having to have out-of-pocket expenses. For temporary housing and household goods shipments, when a corporation or an organization is looking to provide some partial support, maybe not covering all of the expenses, a lump sum is a nice way to provide the cash to the employee so that they can go ahead and then cover the remainder of the costs themselves. And so when you look at the lump sum, the delivery approach, again, is very open. It can be for domestic programs. It can be for cross-border moves. It can be for assignments, short-term and long-term assignments. And we've kind of outlined here some of the components that we would see typically provided in a lump sum for the employee to get and provide support. Lump sums, do free up the time from an administration standpoint. It does eliminate the need for reimbursements for the employee. And it allows the employee to have a little bit more direct control. And it allows the organization to provide some support that's maybe partial and allowing the employee to be vested in some of the costs and participate in the coordination. And as companies and organizations have chosen to include lump sum as a component of their mobility program, it's important to think about how important is it for the organization to validate how the employee is spending the lump sum. The employee is ultimately responsible on how they utilize those funds. And how does it tie into the employee experience? For some corporate cultures, it works really well having the employee self-service themselves a little bit more, where other organizational cultures really want the employee taken care of as far as facilitating and covering expenses for the employee. And then also making sure that the business understands that when you are providing a lump sum, that it will impact your employees' productivity because they will be coordinating some of those services themselves. But regardless of which approach you take, it's just really important to provide the employee with support on how to use their lump sum. not just give them their money and send them on their way or give them a nominal tech support. It really means education, providing them resources and technology and access to a subject matter expert in order to ensure that if they have any questions, they have answers right away, and they don't feel like they've been left kind of alone to kind of fend for themselves. We also wanted to take a look at vendor partnerships, and our survey showed that 63% of organizations believe they can improve the customer and or the employee mobility experience by maintaining program control internally. But yet, we also found through the survey that process efficiency and speed to deploy were ranked as the top 2 mobility challenges. So they kind of contradict each other a little bit. And so really the requirement of an organization to maintain control of their program does not necessarily mean that they have to do all of the work internally themselves on the mobility team. The key is really leveraging your vendor partners for their expertise. And where we have seen programs really be successful here in leveraging the vendor partnerships, they've created a situation where program oversight's been retained within the organizations, but efficiencies have been picked up, and the organization has been able to deploy their talent much faster. And this is typically done with a lot of focus on education, training, corporate cultural awareness, and a real set of defined rules of engagement for the vendor partners on how they work within the program. It'll be really key for your team to focus on the right level of focus. Our survey found that 56% of organizations did not adjust the ratio of mobility professionals to relocating employees by move type, which is really surprising because we all know that different types of moves require different levels of support. So when you're looking at your mobility team, how much support does your employee really need? What is the deployment cycle time within your organization? And what is the life cycle of a move and different types of moves? And how much support will be needed for the assignee from your team? And then take a look at scalability of your team. How are you able to handle spikes in volume due to business initiatives, mergers and acquisitions? And with the right mix on your team, you're better able to support your internal business customers. You need to be effective and be impactful, and our survey showed that 48% of organizations characterize the role of mobility as a partially strategic and consultative business partner. And while this is great because it focuses on the customer experience of the business, where does that leave the employee experience? So it's really making sure that your mobility team is leveraged appropriately for the volume of moves that you're supporting. You need to determine how much time you think that your team will be interacting with employees, how much time will they be advising the business, and what other administration tasks are they responsible for. So really understanding how to better delegate and get out of that day-to-day where you can. Program control does not equal responsibility for operational administrative tasks internally all the time. Vendor partnerships can help you provide capacity for those fluxes in volume, resource scalability. It creates consistency with your processes and the experience for the employee and the business. And then you can realize cost savings through your third-party vendors' purchasing power. And then it gives you the control and structure to maintain your program without having to do all of that day-to-day work yourself. And so with that, Taryn, can you take us through some key takeaways of the survey that we'd like our group to walk away with today?
Yeah, thanks, Kat. So we wanted to keep it fairly simple. So we've highlighted 3 key takeaways, the first of which is to engage. So as we've said and kind of gone through in depth, mobility is significant. But in order for mobility to play a key role within the organization, it's really important that mobility as a function really understand what the priorities of the organization are. Ultimately, mobility is the organization, I should say, is a customer of mobility. And so you want to, as a mobility team and function, want to be able to deliver services to the customer in line with what they're looking for. And the first step in doing that is really to engage with stakeholders, senior stakeholders within the organization, making sure that if your program is global, that you're getting some global perspective really on what those stakeholders are looking to achieve and how mobility can play a role with that. The second step is really to assess and identify. So assess your current program. Really take a good look at your program from a policy and delivery model perspective. Do you have the right policies in place? Do you have the right number of policies in place? Do you have the right resources in place if you are going to try to position mobility as more of a business partner function versus an operational function? Do the skill sets or skill set of your resources match up with the job description that you're looking to put in place for mobility? Identifying any gaps and opportunities that you may have from both a policy and a process perspective. Do you have, the right technology in place? Is that something that you need to consider in order to create efficiencies, or improve the customer or employee experience? So really being kind of honest around where there are some gaps or some misalignment between what the organization needs and what mobility is capable of providing in sync with those organizational needs. And then build and communicate. So either, design or redesign your program to specifically address the identified gaps and opportunities. This doesn't need to be by any means an overnight process, nor does it need to be a very drawn-out process. Likely there are some improvements that can be made with minimal effort and in the very short term. So it's really about incremental change for your program that ultimately results in a redesigned program that now better reflects what the organization, what the business needs. So make sure that when you're going through those gaps and opportunities, that you're prioritizing both the kind of the impact that change, program change would have, as well as the effort that's required to actually get that change implemented. When we talk about effort, obviously we mean, resource, time, and availability, but also, what are the different stakeholders that are going to need to be included as part of that process, either for input and guidance on how to structure the change or to potentially sign off on that change. And then the key, the last and kind of final key is really educating the business on the value proposition of using mobility as a business partner. Obviously mobility will never move out of the operational components. There will always be at least some element of operational support that sits within the mobility function. It may be oversight, for an external partner, but you want to make sure that the operational components are correct and are being handled. But then it's really about educating the business and demonstrating the value add that mobility brings to discussions around who to deploy, where to deploy, and the right level of support to provide to that individual. Ultimately, I think everyone's goal is for successful relocations, both for the benefit of the organization, for the employee, and for the overall branding of the mobility program. You want people to be excited about these opportunities, and you want people to agree to these opportunities. And if you can demonstrate that mobility is well structured and partnering with the business to help make smart decisions and very, kind of rational decisions around who to send somewhere and why, the success rate of your relocation should be on the uptick. So with that, we'll pause. I know we don't have a ton of time, but let's see if we have any questions. And as we wait for maybe some of those to come in, just a heads up for some upcoming events that we have. Our 2018 mobility report, so kind of the formal version of some of the information that we've shared today, will be released next week, the week of December 17th, so keep an eye out for that. We would love to hear from you on, you know, what is really interesting to you as part of that report. You know, if you'd like more information on any particular component in that report or anything that we talked about today, please let us know. We also, coming up in January, on January 10th at 9:30 a.m. Singapore time and then 11 a.m. Eastern time, we will be doing a webinar, an hour session just on lump sums. So kind of a deep dive into lump sum programs there. So hopefully you can join us if you are able to. I don't see any questions coming in, so I guess with that we'll say thank you to everyone for participating. We wish everyone a happy and healthy holiday. Hope you get to enjoy some time off with family and friends. And again, thank you for participating. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.